Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Maggie Chan. I'm the Manager of Membership and Annual Giving here at PAFA, and we are delighted to welcome you to our President's Preview, a yearly program that provides a special behind the scenes on our exciting plans ahead, and was created with our members in mind. You are the heart of our community, and we're incredibly grateful for everything that your support and friendship makes possible at PAFA. So now before I hand it over to our speakers, I just wanted to share a quick reminder that we'll have a Q&A session after the talk, so we ask that you please save your questions until the end. And if you haven't seen our current exhibition on view, Making American Artists, Stories from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts from 1776 through 1976, we invite you to go up to our galleries after the program and to see the exhibition before it closes on April the 2nd. And looking further ahead, please save the date for May 11th for our 122nd annual student exhibition preview party. It's a great opportunity to be among the first to see and purchase works from PAFA's Rising Stars, and all of the proceeds go towards our student scholarships. Tickets and sponsorships are already available on our website. We'll also be holding member tours throughout the run of the exhibition from May 12th through June 4th. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to announce our speakers, President and CEO Eric Pryor, Dr. Anna Marley, our Chief of Curatorial Affairs, and Kenneth R. Woodcock, Curator of Historical American Art, and Dr. Brittany Webb, our Evelyn and Will Kaplan Curator of 20th Century Art and the John Rhoden Collection. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maggie. First, let me start off by welcoming all of you and thanking you for taking your time here on this Saturday morning to join us here in a conversation that will focus on our museum and where we feel that we can go. But first, let me just start off by putting some things in context. First, when I look at PAFA and I look at what we do here, we are America's first contemporary art museum. And I say that because when the historic works in our collection were collected, they were contemporary art. And I think that's so important to recognize and realize that this institution has been at the heart of contemporary art from the beginning. And so when we look at our vision for the future, we feel like it should continue to be rooted in contemporary art and make certain that we are telling the story of American art from the beginning on through to today, and be that unbroken line that can tell unique stories. The other thing I would just say that's tremendously amazing, and when we hear from Dr. Marley and Dr. Webb, you understand what they're able to do in their vision for our museum is really about putting works in conversation with one another. Historic works with 20th century with contemporary. And in doing so, they're able to create this, just things that are exciting and dynamic, things that people are not used to seeing necessarily together. So it's really, really quite unique. And as those of you who've seen Making American Artists, you get a little bit of a preview of that within that exhibition. The other thing from where I sit that makes us extremely unique is that we, at the depth of the collection, PAFA just recently, the Burns Halpern report, and it's not because of anything I did, let me just be very clear, but when I look historically at our collections committee and our curators who have looked at how to really grow the collection here at PAFA, we were noted as and really recognized for the diversity of the collection, the number of women artists in our collection, the number of African American artists, BIPOC artists. And what's interesting is that just didn't start recently. This is something that happened from the beginning here at PAFA. So when you put all those things together, I think that we realize that the vision for our museum is really about taking these things that a lot of institutions are playing catch up, but the fact that PAFA has been doing it from the beginning, we're able to lean into it in a way that other people are not. So now I want to just dive right in and I'm going to pose the first question to Anna, start us off. When I just mentioned Making American Artists on view upstairs, and when you look at the 3 projects that your team has been working on and developing, and as the chief curator, in interesting ways, tell us more about how the 3 projects, the 3 seminal projects that you're working on, or exhibitions, how they work together and how you guys conceive them.
Great, thanks Eric. So we realized, as we were working hard from our home offices, summer of 2020, trying to get together on Zoom through momentous changes, that we had amazing opportunities to create really new narratives of American art. And as Eric says, these capitalize on the way we've been approaching American art since we were founded in 1805. And we conceived, and it grew more formal as we put our exhibition schedule together, that we would have this suite of 3 exhibitions that represent our 3 collecting areas, starting this past summer in 2022 with the opening of Making American Artists. So Making American Artists spans from the 1770s to the 1970s. And then right now, as we speak, we are installing the entire historic landmark building with 11 amazing contemporary commissions for Rising Sun, Artists in an Uncertain America, which is a project that we developed in partnership with the African American Museum in Philadelphia. So that project and its origination goes back to our former contemporary curator, Jody Throckmorton, in 2019, visiting Independence Hall. And I love this story because it pretty much embodies everything we do here, which is she was visiting Independence Hall with friends from out of town, and she was looking at this chair, the Rising Sun chair in Independence Hall, and she came across this quote from Benjamin Franklin. And the quote is the sun rising or setting on our republic? And she thought, what an interesting prompt for contemporary artists today. And she kept thinking about this show for a long time, and then she started working with Duckett at AMP, who is our amazing partner on this show, about innovative ways that we could curate across institutions. So opening the week of March 21st, 22nd, and 23rd is going to be this massive show across 2 institutions, AMP and PAFA, which has 20 contemporary commissions in the show at both spaces. Our website for that show should be launching next week. You can all come on March 23rd to see the exhibition. And so what I love about that show is a very contemporary curator came up with this idea for this most contemporary show that is inherently connected to the past of Philadelphia and the potential promises and pitfalls of Philadelphia. And I think, that's something Brittany and I talk a lot about as we think about American art. We talk about, all the potential and promise and all the failures along the way. And I was just, it was so great to have coffee with all of you. And one of our longtime members came up to me and said, I grew up in Philadelphia, but never have I seen a label in an art museum that acknowledged that George Washington was a slave owner, was an enslaver. And we all know this to be the case, right? But I think what we're really interested is, and have been for a very long time, is an expansive view of what American art is and what American artists, who gets to be an American artist, right? That's what the central premise is of Making American Artists. And so I started curating Making American Artists actually because I knew Rising Sun was happening. So we had to get the art out of the historic landmark building to put up Rising Sun. So I then was like, okay, what do I do? What do we do? And we started working with the American Federation of the Arts to create a touring show. And, our collection is 16,000 objects. So to curate a show that took 200 years with 103 objects was very challenging, and I was lucky. I enlisted some of my colleagues in the city of Philadelphia and former curators who knew this collection really well. And I basically said, what works can you not do without telling this story? Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw was one of the scholars who I consulted with. Our former curators, Robert Cozzolino, Brittany Webb, also, I said, it was summer of 21, I think, or 20, and I sent the checklist, and I'm like, okay, what has to be in here? And the art drove the checklist and the story and then the organization. And then our third show, which has also been cooking for a long time, even before Brittany Webb was hired here as the John Rhoden curator, in our beautiful John Rhoden auditorium and the Dietrich stage. It is the John Rhoden retrospective, which I will let Brittany talk about, but I do want to set the stage because the flow of these shows, Making American Artists, Rising Sun, and then there'll be this brief moment where those two shows, Making American Artists and Rising Sun, are open at the same time. And then Making American Artists will close, the annual student exhibition will open, and then Making American Artists will start traveling around the country. And we can talk a little bit about that. And then in October, the John Rhoden retrospective will open, which is the first retrospective of the fabulous African-American mid-century sculptor, and I think Cold War spy. We can talk a bit more about that. John Rhoden. And the reason that show is happening is, of course, due to Brittany's brilliance, but it's also due to this long history that Eric mentioned, because a number of years ago, we did a wonderful show on Norman Lewis. And our curator of that show was the brilliant Ruth Fine, who had wanted to do that show at the National Gallery of Art, where she worked for many years. And they would never do it. So then when Ruth retired and moved to Philadelphia, she proposed the Norman Lewis show to PAFA. And many of you probably saw that show and were blown away by it. But this is a long history we have here of taking these spectacular artists who had not yet received their critical due and investing in them and creating huge, beautiful shows. So Norman Lewis was one of those examples. Henry Tanner was one of those examples. Joan Semmel, one of our most recent examples. And Norman Lewis, so Norman Lewis got on the front page of the New York Times. And then the manager of the estate of John Rhoden wrote a letter to PAFA and said, hey, I see you care about underrated artists who have not yet received their due. Would you like to receive the estate of John Rhoden?
What?
Yes. Yes. So the answer is take those letters. Don't ever underestimate the power of a New York Times front page article. and say yes to taking risks, right? We're talking about Making American Artists is a collection show. Rising Sun is actually also a collection show because they're commissions that we're bringing into the show, group shows. And then John Rhoden, which Brittany will talk about, is a focused show on an amazing artist who was always there. He was there from the beginning at the highest level. He, just like many of the artists in Making American Artists, have faded from our collective knowledge. So, with those juxtapositions that you see in the show, you might all know who Edward Hopper is, but you don't know who Hilda Belker is. You might know who Andrew Wyeth is, and hopefully now you all know who Ed Loper is. But these women and Black artists in their time were equally as successful and amazing as their white male contemporaries. But history has not recognized that. And we at PAFA have been doing that since 1805. And you can see that because if you look at the labels and you look when things were brought into the collection, we didn't just start buying women artists or Black artists 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We've been buying that work since the 1890s and 1900. So.
Thank you. The context in which you bring things there, Anna, is amazing. Brittany, when we look at the themes, and I know you're going to tell us about the John Rhoden show that's going to be coming up, and when I was talking to you the other day, you mentioned that it's a discovery story. Yes. And I'd love for you to help us to understand that discovery and tell us about it, and tell us about the salient themes within the Rhoden show.
Sure. You set me up so nicely. So thank you both, and thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning. And I think that part of what I love about having this conversation here is that if you look on either sides of the room, you're actually surrounded by sculptures by John Rhoden. So if you could just briefly take a moment while I'm talking about this man to just look to your left and look to your right, and keep in mind, these are all sculptures by the same artist. This is something that I get asked about often, that how are all of these sculptures that look so different, how are they all by the same artist? I think one of the things that I think is interesting about this discovery story, that it's a sort of cyclical theme for me that comes up over and over and over again. So one of the ways that the longtime friend and executor of the Rhoden estate discovers PAFA is in this New York Times story. And so at the time, you know, John Rhoden, who was this mid-century sculptor who had passed away in 2001, his wife, Rashonda, who was also an artist, passed away a decade after, had left this incredible archive of almost 300 sculptures that they lived with in their 4-story, 8,000 square foot house in Brooklyn. And they had no children. They hadn't established a house museum. And so when they passed away, they left this house and they left all these incredible sculptures to their friend and lawyer and estate executor, who was thinking, what am I going to do with all of this art? And what is going to happen to the legacy of this prolific artist? And so I think it's fascinating to think about, you know, this man opening up the New York Times and discovering PAFA. And so in the reach out to PAFA to think about, you know, does this make sense for PAFA? Sort of digging into, well, what's the story when you get that letter? And we get so many letters about all kinds of artists that have just not yet been discovered by our major institutions and by art history. When you start to dig into the story, it really begs the question, how have we not all heard this story? So this is a young person who was born in Birmingham in 1916. The red clay, the red soil, became the sort of impetus for him to become interested in sculpture as a really young person. I think as a preteen, really. And so I want you to sort of imagine, you know, who is this young Black kid in the 1920s and 30s who's fascinated by clay and starts working just on his own. He discovers a local artist, William Grant, sculpting in a studio and sort of is watching in the window like sculpture happen and becomes fascinated. And William Grant ended up mentoring him a little bit, sort of saying, okay, I see that this is somebody, a young person who's very interested in art. Let's see what you can do. And so he gives him a hunk of clay. Rhoden takes it home, sculpts a bust of his sister, brings it back to the artist, who's really impressed by this young kid who has this talent, and is sort of like, okay, let's maybe do a little bit of work together. And that becomes the beginning of this incredible art trajectory. So as a teenager, he was sculpting people in his community. He did a bust of his high school principal. He graduated from high school and went to Talladega College, which is a historically Black college in Alabama. While he was at Talladega College, he started to discover a kind of Southern arts scene. And so he met Hale Woodruff, who, for those of you who don't know, was at the time the working artist in Atlanta who established the Atlanta annual exhibitions for Black artists that function for historically Black colleges in the South the way that PAFA's annual exhibitions function for artists here. And so it became a kind of counterpart of, how do you build an institution that makes it possible for artists who are working to get their work out, to get their work seen, and to form community and show in exhibitions. And so meeting Hale Woodruff was the really pivotal thing, I think, for Rhoden to understand, there is an art world out here that I might want to tap into. And so Woodruff told Rhoden, you should really visit New York if you want to be serious about your art. And so in 1936, Rhoden went to New York, fell into these social networks that were established by the Harlem Renaissance, which, in the 1920s was this incredible moment where you had all kinds of artists, performing artists, visual artists in New York, just in community, making work together, bouncing off of each other, and really, I think, becoming like a kind of an art historical touch point for so many people in New York in the mid-century, right before we start to think of New York as the center of a kind of art world. And so Rhoden told all of these stories in later interviews. He went to New York on vacation for 2 weeks and just never left, which is a story so many artists have.
Henry Tanner goes to Paris on his way to Rome and never leaves.
Right, this unplanned, so he's discovering this art world. So Rhoden had a sort of brief detour where he served in the military during World War II, and then used his GI Bill benefits to go to art school at Columbia. And at Columbia, he really honed his sculptural talent. And so if you're seeing these stone works on this side of the room, these are works that come out of that early period in his career, the 1940s and 50s, where he's working with professors who are teaching this kind of direct carving tradition where he's thinking about the figure and the materiality of stone in a really tactile way that feels very PAFA. If you've been here, if you've walked through the cast hall, I think these were the first works that we saw, and we thought, those look like they're directly out of PAFA archives. But I think what becomes really extraordinary is after art school, he got into the American Academy in Rome. He became the first Black visual artist ever to win the Rome Prize. From there, he won a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship, which sent him to Indonesia. He spent 2 years working in Bali. He was an artist that was part of a delegation put together by the US State Department, where they had sent these artists on these tours, essentially establishing for the world, like this idea that America is a place where artists have the freedom to make work. And this sort of moment of, high modernism, I think, in the 1950s and 60s, where they're going to the USSR. So he's in Poland, he's in Japan, he's in North Africa, he's in Italy, he's in Paris, he's in London, he's all over the world. And then after he spends all of this time in Asia and working in wood, and you start to see the ways that all of this travel impacts his work, he settles in New York in the 1960s and shows in every major institution that you ever want to show in, wins every major art award that you ever want to win. And because he didn't work with a gallery, and because he had so many public commissions that he wasn't dependent on a gallery for sales of his work, he was able to maintain his own archive, which is why it's possible for all of these sculptures to be in one place, and for PAFA to be in a position to think about how do you tell the story of this artist with all of this historical material, and not necessarily needing to, hunt down all of the artwork in private collections. And so there's so much to discover about this story. And I also think that it's such a nice example of one of the things that we can do with this museum's collection. And so if we think about what's interesting about this kind of history, Anna and I always talk about, how are you mining the past to make sure that it helps you better understand the present? And so I think we get really expansive about time. And so I love that we have Rising Sun and the idea of all of these contemporary artists who are inspired by history. It's great when we can tell historical stories in new ways that make us think differently about the present. And it's really amazing to be able to do that in group shows and tackle like those exact same themes. Who gets to be an American artist? How does one become an American artist? What does it mean to be an American artist in a globalizing world? What does it mean to take seriously that the world has always been global, that American artists have always gone abroad to understand their place in the world and their place in art history? And to be able to do that in a show like Making American Artists and Rising Sun, and then take it back to see, you know, in the history of one artist's life, you can see all of those same questions being asked and answered in different ways. I think it's really exciting.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you. So my next question, it's why are all of these exhibits so important? I feel like I kind of know the answer from what both of you said, but if either of you want to, expand on why Making American Artists, why John Rhoden, and why Rising Sun, why is it important for us to have this suite of art, this suite of exhibitions in this moment? If you could talk about that, either of you.
Well, I'll jump off of what Brittany said, and what we love, and what I love about being a curator in Philadelphia is the past is always alive and inextricably connected to the present moment. And that Brittany and I are both historians. You know, I'm an art historian. Brittany was trained as an anthropologist. So we have very critical ways of looking at the past. And you cannot understand what the United States is and how we got here if you do not understand the past. You can't fix anything about the present moment that we're in if you don't understand the past and what's been done and how the history of the country has been shaped. And I find personally, you know, Brittany can reflect on this, one of the best ways to do this and to share a critical understanding of the past is through art objects. There was a great quote that I got in a review in the Inquirer about a show I did during the pandemic, Women in Motion. And the critic said, the sneaky genius of this show is making you not realize that this whole show, this whole half of the historic building is by women artists, and that there's no difference between the male artists on the other half. So what I think the sneaky genius of PAFA and using art is that we can lure people in with beauty in a very accessible way, and beauty and visuality and artists' narratives and stories can help everyone ask really hard questions about the past and think about how artists negotiated their experience of life in the times that they lived, and inspire us to be broader thinkers. You know, we are one of the centers for arts education for many public schools in the city of Philadelphia. And so we have an obligation to tell a broad and challenging story of American art through our collection to that generation. And to ask really hard questions in ways that are not, for me, not aggressive, but open up conversations. I think that's something Brittany and I share. We're not simplistic thinkers. But we also have this great collection that we're not, I also believe we're not condescending thinkers. We're curators for a reason. Both Brittany and I have PhDs, but we're not in the academy because we want to tell broad stories and we want to make them as accessible as possible. So that's why, I think your question was, why is this important?
Yeah, you touched on it. You definitely.
Yeah. So, Brittany?
Sure. I mean, I think all the shows are important, even though not all of them are my shows per se. I think one of the things that makes the Rhoden story so important is, one of the things that I love about history is not just that it gives us a sense of where we are, but history is always sort of revealing to us, I think, new possibilities. Like, it helps us rethink the conditions of possibility, I think, for our contemporary moment and for our future. And so, top sort of reasons I think the Rhoden show is so important is, one, it's such an incredible story that hasn't really been told in a comprehensive way. And I think it's worth telling. I think one of the things that is really inspiring about this mid-century artist is that he moves through the world in ways that we imagine contemporary artists do now seamlessly, in a time where there was really no roadmap. This is, we're talking about the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s. It's not the era where you have artists who are jet setting all over the world the way now we imagine that artists are constantly traveling, and that's going to impact their work. And they're going to be supported by these incredible foundations and these different art schools, various kinds of patrons. There is a Crescent scholarship at PAFA that sends artists abroad often when they win the award at graduation, but there's actually not a lot of awards like that in the 20th century that have artists flinging themselves all over the world to think broadly about what are artists doing in my hometown, but what are artists doing in Russia, what are artists doing in Tokyo, what are artists doing in Paris that I can learn from, what are artists doing in London, what are artists doing in Tanzania that I can draw from, and that's going to enrich my practice. And I think that what's nice about that kind of history and thinking about what it looks like for an artist to maintain control of their own work and their own archive is that it provides a kind of historical anchor, I think, to a lot of artists now who are trying to figure out what's possible for themselves in the world. And it's always really inspiring to find a historical touch point that lets you know you're not having to invent yourself from scratch all the time. I think as a thinker, we appreciate that as curators. I would agree that we are very capacious thinkers who have a lot of interests. I think we're deeply curious. And this is the kind of story that I think appeals to people who are curious. And even if you don't care about sculpture, even if you're not interested in, what public commissions do for an artist's career, or how that might impact how we think about when is a public sculpture just a public sculpture and when is a public sculpture a monument? How do we know? Why do we care? What does it say about us as viewers? What does it say about us as people who live in cities with a ton of public art? Even if you don't care about that, there's also, this great kind of Cold War story of like, what does artist as diplomat mean for us in the 20th century? And how does that also work for us now? How are artists changing the way we think about what it is to be an American, what it is to be a global citizen? How does that help us? And also the work is really beautiful. And so there's also this piece of, what does the material tell us? I'll say that when I came to this project, one of the things that was really important and interesting to me was this idea of, we need to tell the story of this unknown sculptor, or we need to tell the story of this overlooked sculptor. And one of the things that stands out about the materials is, if you can imagine such a thing, when I first came to know visually the works of Rhoden, it was walking into a room where there were roughly 100 sculptures, half of which were taller than I am, half of which were bronze. And what that kind of material told me was, oh no, this is not an unknown sculptor, because bronze is very expensive.
Yes.
And so I know that if you are unknown, it's very difficult to keep up with these foundry bills. And it's very difficult to keep all of these sculptures, in good condition, to keep making them, to keep them in your house, to be in a position to be able to afford a home that can hold all of these massive bronze sculptures if no one has ever heard of you. I mean, the economics alone just don't That's not how that works. And so that immediately, that materiality, what does the material tell us? What can we learn from bronze? What can we learn from, these luscious wood works that are sourced from trees halfway around the world? The materials, I'm already a kind of person who thinks, okay, but where do they come from out of the earth? Who is shipping them halfway across the world? What do those shipping bills look like? One of the things you know about curating is the administration piece, all the behind the scenes work of, somebody has to dig up materials, somebody has to pack sculptures into boxes and put them on ships or on planes. There's an invoice for that, someone's paying for it. So if you know that is happening behind the scenes, that's the material conditions of possibility that makes all of the beauty you walk into a gallery real. That is already a kind of behind the scenes stories that's like, I think, really important for us to think about as an institution that makes American artists. How can we tell this important story of not just, what does genius look like in the mind and in the hands of this person that you haven't heard of? How is he so productive? How is he so inspired and so prolific, despite the fact that he's being overlooked? How does he become inspired to keep going? And what can we learn from it as we are thinking about that kind of legacy, even in this moment where he's not necessarily here to see the show, but in some ways, if you're at least a little bit spiritual about the arts, we who work with the material genius left behind by artists who are no longer with us, we are always in community with artists who are both living and dead. And so how do we ensure that that's something that we can always do in exhibitions is a question that drives us. And I think that's one of the things that makes this show really important.
Well, thank you. Well, we're we're definitely at this very important point in American history. And I'm probably botched a word. Is it the quincentennial? Is it? Well, it's the 250th anniversary. Semi-quincentennial. Thank you. Semi-quincentennial.
Yes.
All right. So that's coming, and we all know that Philadelphia is at the heart of the American story, so when we look at that in that moment, and we look at how does this cohesive suite of exhibitions paved the way for this bold new installation of our historic landmark building. And that reinstallation, the reason why I brought up the 250th, of course, is that the plan is for that to be unveiled, of course, or open, I should say, at that point in time in 2026 at the 250th. So how does the suite pave the way?
So when Brittany and I are not doing international shipping and writing John Rhoden essays or making American artists catalogs or working with contemporary artists to install Rising Sun, we are trying to think deeply about how PAFA is going to respond to this moment of reckoning and celebration in the country that is now the United States. So we have been working for the past year or so, starting to formulate how PAFA is going to reinstall the historic landmark building in 2026. And so we are using these exhibitions that we're working on now for this suite of 2022, 2023, through into 2024 to think about ways that we can tell the story of American art in new ways. Both celebrating the contributions of PAFA, but also critiquing the things that we have left out and the stories we have left out. And we're beginning to do that with, Rhoden is one example, but another is two of the commissions in Rising Sun are by Native American artists, Rose B. Simpson and Deani Whitehawk, and they are major commissions. And as we think in a very self-aware way about the gaps in our collection, we know that we have left out a lot of stories in telling American art, particularly Latinx histories, histories of Native American artists, as well as Asian American artists. And so as we work towards 2026, we are thinking about ways that we can address some of that. Some of that is through contemporary commissions. Some of that will be through 20th century collecting that Brittany will finally be able to do starting in 2024, I hope. And she has a whole collecting plan that she presented in 2021 to address some of those gaps. You know, I've been here for 14 years now, so I've had opportunities to collect in depth, particularly Black artists and women artists from the 18th century to the early 20th century. So Brittany has identified other areas in the 20th century that she wants to collect in. And then, of course, we're actively collecting contemporary art. So our plan for 2026 will be to bring all the lessons learned over the past few years, to work with the next generation of scholars, to work with a group of humanities advisors and community advisors in the city of Philadelphia and around the country to install the historic landmark building in a completely non-chronological fashion that brings work from the 18th century to 2026 together to have critical conversations. And so making American artists for me was just I don't want to say it was just an exercise, but it was a practice to think about, well, from 1776 to 1976, what could we do? How could we shake things up? Because our collection is one of the best in the world, bar none. Nobody would argue with that, you know. It is, for telling the history of the United States, it is one of the best in the world. So we have a responsibility and an obligation to address the strengths and the weaknesses of that collection and use that collection to celebrate and critique 250 years of the United States. And what better place than to do that than in Philadelphia, where, you know, the state of the United States was created. So Brittany, do you want to talk any more about that?
Yeah, just that I think it's an incredibly exciting moment to get to think critically about the future and the past in a way that is non-chronological, in part because Philadelphia is steeped in history in a way that not all cities are, and that shows up in our collection, I think, in really innovative and interesting ways. We also work with so many contemporary artists who are very interested in history.
Yes.
When they come to PAFA, they are interested in the architecture of the Furness Hewitt building. There's, I think about how often we have critical conversations with artists that are about contemporary practice, but also, you know, they want to look at PAFA's archives. They want to look at the historic art. They want to look at historic architecture. They are excited by the way that history is alive always and with us in Philadelphia. And so I think that one of the things that our reinstallation can do in 2026 is elevate that element of, you know, why we are thinking non-chronologically. And in that way, I think it's nice that we are really following artists who are also not thinking chronologically about art history. And I think that could be really exciting for everyone.
And a great example of that is one of the artists who's working on Rising Sun, Saya Woolfach. As she was working on her commission, she was teaching a class at the University of Pennsylvania, and she and I worked together with the class and toured Making American Artists and looked at our portraits of George Washington, particularly the Gilbert Stuart. And we thought about how that painting was constructed, and she was thinking very specifically about the figure of George Washington and the paint colors that were used and that 18th century legacy. And when you see Rising Sun, you'll see these monumental figures that she created that look nothing like George Washington, nothing like. That is like Saya's embodiment of her what's that word?
Futurity?
Yeah, Brittany said it. But she's so excited and to do that at PAFA, to work with to have the portrait of George Washington by Gilbert Stuart for her to work with to rethink is exactly
Wow.
what we love doing.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful answers. This is our last question, and I know I think we're gonna open it up to questions. But when originally when I got here, I've been at PAFA now just over a year. But one of the things that was really amazing to me was how creative our curatorial team is with the collection. I mean, Women in Motion, if you saw Dr. Marley's show, was just amazing. And then Brittany did Gift Deeds, which was another just taking and riffing with collections that had been donated to PAFA. And then, to encapsulate it with Making American Artists. And one of the things that I did, me and my wife, was we invited friends of ours from Washington and New York to come. And they all went through it. They were like, you guys own all of these? I mean, they were really amazed that this was put together from our collection. So my next question is, how does PAFA work to acquire new works of art for our collection in a strategic way and making it possible to do these incredible exhibitions? So if you could talk a little bit about, I guess how the sausage is made, or how do we get these works into our collection and strategically? Because we get a lot of requests. People want to give you art all the time. Let's just be really, really clear. So how do you think about it? We don't have unlimited storage. You can't take on everything. So how do you make those tough decisions?
Well, we have very stringent collecting plans that the curatorial team develops together. So in the time that I've been here, what is remarkable about PAFA's curatorial team is that we work really closely together and we try to find through lines from the 18th century to tomorrow, basically. And we recognize what our gaps are and how we need to fill those gaps. We also try to build on strengths. So for me, in my case, I identified 3 areas when I started 14 years ago. Historic women artists, historic black artists, and then artists of various landscape traditions that we had not collected in. And that was the area that I was going to tackle. So we work closely with our collections committee. We get wonderful works by gift. We have limited funds where we can make purchases. We also work directly with living artists. But we do have a rigorous set of criteria because we can't collect everything. And we can't afford to collect everything we would want. Right, Brittany?
Yeah, and I think we often, especially in this moment, are mindful of how many of our peer institutions collect ambitiously and sometimes enviously, but don't often get work on view. And so one of the things that we talk about often is, this is an amazing artwork. How soon do we imagine we could get it on view? Do we think that it's going to go on view? Is this the right fit for PAFA right now? If we're thinking about the future, what's the roadmap between taking it in right now and getting it on view next year, in 2 years, in 3 years? What does that look like? And I don't think that is something that happens across the field. I don't think all museums are thinking about, how soon can we get this work on view if we take it into our collection. But that is also a conversation that we have. I think that one of the things that I enjoy about being in the area between, the historic and the contemporary is I'm always mindful of the fact that there's really no way to fill every gap in the 20th century collection because so much happened in the 20th century and we don't have unlimited storage. But thinking about what are the best bridges between historic and contemporary for PAFA, especially since we work closely together, we think closely together, we like to play with time, we like to play with materials, we like to think about things like, what could we do that no one else would do?
Yeah.
What can we do that no one else is doing? Where do we need to sort of look at our peers for examples of things that we might need to do? And where do we need to do a kind of scan of, oh, if everybody is going left, this is where we maybe should go right. I think that guides a lot of our decision making across time, and also in thinking about materiality. We think about materials a lot.
And I often think, because of the strength of our collection, something I think about is, okay, if we accept this gift or buy this work of art, am I going to take the fox hunt or John Brown going to his hanging down?
Yeah.
Will I take those down to put this up? And that, when you start as a curator here, it's pretty intimidating because you're like, whoa, what can I get that will contribute to this collection, right?
Right.
So you have to really believe in something and say, yes, this is worth it. And yes, we will take this down to put this up, or this will hang comfortably with this. They will talk to each other.
And that's really important, because if you take the fox hunt down, you will get a lot of questions from a lot of people.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will.
I came to see the fox hunt and I noticed that you took it down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I wanna let's give Brittany and Anna a hand. One thing is clear: some people, they were amazing, and to be surrounded by just two deep thinkers and intellectuals who are thinking about artwork the way they are. People say, well, what's my role in this? Well, I'm a maker. I come out of the maker space. I have a BFA and an MFA in painting, so I get to challenge them from the side or a point of view of the artist. But it is amazing to have conversations like this with both of these just wonderful thinkers. And the one thing, if you don't take anything else away from this moment, what one realizes that curating is a creative endeavor. They are taking the art and basically creating from that, which I think is an incredible extension, and they're doing it in wonderful and thoughtful ways. And I know at this point we're going to open the floor for questions. So Maggie, you want to tell us how that's going to work?
Yep, so I'm just gonna take a Q&A. Anyone from the audience?
Thank you. I'm Mary Frances. That's my first name. And I live five blocks from the Art Museum, which has that, I'm blanking on his name.
The Rhoden?
Charles Wilson Peele?
Charles Wilson Peele.
Okay.
Paintings. 5 blocks from the Independence Hall, where he had that studio. That's what I mean. I'm very lucky to have a piece of a PAFA graduate, Nina Klemoska, who's now 83, in my apartment. Fortunately, it's small. And I wanted to bring something to your attention, which I just learned about this morning. There is a painting by a PAFA graduate. I don't know if he taught here. I know that he studied here. His last name is Harding. He was a muralist. I think his first name is Richard, was Richard. I forget the guy's first name, but Taylor, the owner of Taylor Pork Rolls. We know that? I used to love them. He did a very large mural of Washington crossing the Delaware that hung, you know about this? That hung in a museum. It was given to, this was in Trenton. It was given, I think, to Museum of New Jersey or something like that. But they couldn't hang it. They didn't have the space that was large enough to hang it. So this is where I learned the phrase, semi-sesquicentennial. They're building a larger museum which will be able to hang it, and they're spending about $70,000 restoring it, having been rolled up in a basement. It has some restoration needs. And so Richard Harding was his name, and he studied here.
Thank you.
Just
for
a
sharing.
comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Frances. Anyone else?
I just wanted to follow up on your Making American Artists exhibit. First of all, I've taken it a number of times and just loved it. It's fantastic, and I think your idea of kind of the dialogue between traditional and contemporary, I think that's an interesting direction to go because you can keep honoring sort of past holdings. But I guess the question was, you alluded to the idea that the exhibition would be traveling, and you also touched on the idea of, publicity for the holdings and kind of the benefits to the institution that's kind of come out of that. So could you give us a sense of, one, where we'll be going, where we'll be showing, and how are you going to make sure it gets publicized accordingly so that, the full value gets realized back to the institution?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that great question. So currently, right now, it is traveling to 4 venues nationally, although it could go up to 6. It can't go to more than 6 because we need it back for 2026. So we're partnering with the American Federation in the Arts, which is a nonprofit touring company. And they are sending it to the Wichita Museum of Art in Kansas, the Albuquerque Museum of Art in New Mexico, why do I do this? I always blank. It's Tulsa, Oklahoma. Philbrook, thank you, because Susan and I just talked about this. The Philbrook in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Ackland Museum in North Carolina at UNC Chapel Hill. So I think what you can see from that tour is there are no venues in the Northeast. But it's spreading, like PAFA is spreading around the Southeast and the Southwest. To places which may have never been able to see our collections, who don't have anything like our collections. And also, very exciting, there's going to be an amazing, beautiful catalog coming out. So some of you, I know, because I talked to you, attended a series of lectures that we had about making American artists. And the people who spoke were the authors for the catalog, which are Jonathan Katz, Dana Bird, and Christian Crouch. And they spoke about the history of Black artists at PAFA, LGBTQ artists at PAFA, and the either lack of or the sort of long legacies of not having Indigenous artists in this collection, but then some of the contemporary Indigenous artists as well as 19th century. So there's going to be an amazing catalog that's going to be distributed by the University of Chicago Press, and then there's going to be the tour all around the country. So, and on the cover of the catalog is going to be the Barclay Hendricks painting that starts out the show. So this catalog is being produced in Germany, and it's going to be, I believe, on the cover of this international sales catalog for both the Hermer and the University of, I don't know if it's going to be on Chicago's cover, but it's going to achieve wide acclaim. It's going to tour around the country, and we hope that that will expose everyone to the amazing collection that PAFA has, and then in turn bring them back to Philadelphia. It is hard to realize on that investment, like how do you, even if people recognize it or enjoy it, how do you get them to come back and invest in this place that we love so much? That is a serious challenge. But I think hopefully, did you have a follow-up?
I do, yeah. So I appreciate the chance to ask another person around on this, but I think it's fantastic. It's moving to those places, but you're not talking about major media hubs like LA, Chicago, New York. And to me, I think that's a little bit of an opportunity missed.
I think that's a great point. You said New York, Chicago, and LA.
Yeah.
I would also say that New York, Chicago, and LA have their own wonderful collections, like the Art Institute of Chicago and MoMA and Whitney and LACMA and Brooklyn, and they don't, it is the rest of this country that needs our collection and needs to experience it, because those hubs already have their own major collections.
Can I share a little something? Me and Anna had an incredible meeting yesterday with the CEO of Art Bridges. And I don't know if you know what Art Bridges is, but Art Bridges is basically a nonprofit that's really looking at they have an incredible collection themselves. They are not call it a museum without walls. They don't have a building or a place, but what they're trying to do is to make certain that these wonderful collections, we said, 16,000 works here. Many times there are people around America who don't see these works. They are not in the major hubs. So one of the things that they're also doing, and we're going to be participating in, is you can loan them smaller groupings of works, and then a lot of the regional museums around the country can then bring these works in and share them with our citizens from across the country. And one of the best things I think that can happen, because the arts are oftentimes threatened within, whether it's national budgets or state budgets, and oftentimes part of the reason for that is that people don't have the opportunity to experience just how transformative it is to interact with art and interact with culture. So I think it's really important, and I definitely understand and hear what you're saying, but one of the things that in terms of the opportunities is that there's a real opportunity to make sure that works are going to regions of our country where people haven't gotten an opportunity to experience these works. And Art Bridges is really funded by Alice Walton, and so just thinking about how she created Crystal Bridges and really bring first-class collection to a region of the country that just really, quite frankly, didn't get it. So hopefully we'll create a situation where people from these various, as Anna said, locations will want to come to Philadelphia and want to come to PAFA as well as to our other amazing cultural institutions here and visit and experience the works because of what they may have saw through Making American Artists. So.
Well, thank you, Eric. We just have one more question.
Congratulations on what you've done, but what seems to be missing is digital. We're in 2023. What are your plans digitally to expose the exhibition to millions around the world, and also your catalog to have it digitally as opposed to just having it on paper?
Do you want to take that?
I'll take it. I mean, well, one of the things that, I would just say in terms of technology, I think you need to come see Rising Sun, because those artists are using video and are using technology in a way where it's they're right at the forefront of using 21st century media. One of the things that I would say now, what we have done or what they've done, our entire collection is digitized. So people can experience our collection anywhere in the world. Now I will say this, when I look at the artists in this museum, and it's very different seeing it on a computer screen than when you go upstairs. And I kind of tell people and date myself a little bit here, sort of like seeing Jurassic Park on a 13-inch television. It's just quite not the same. I think they're just, I love digital, but I think there's certain aspects of art, particularly when you look at scale and texture, and we'll do it. And I mean, but I think what we really want to do is get people to see the actual work, but to see a painting, and I'm a tall guy, so to see a work that's larger than oneself, it just gives you a different perspective than you would ever get seeing it digitally. But we do have our archives; they are digitized. Scholars gain access to them as well as others who may want to see the work, and we're definitely looking. And we're also in conversation. The Bloomberg Foundation, they have an initiative, because a lot of institutions were looking to develop apps for themselves. And so all these different, and it's very expensive, and most institutions couldn't do it, and then you have to what do you call it, refresh it, get the technology up to date because of the bugs. We know we all have our iPhones, you got to refresh these apps all the time. So what they're doing is creating, and I forget that right now I'm drawing a blank on the name of the platform, but they're doing a platform where they're creating an app where, and right now I think they have close to 200 museums from around the world that are being part of this app, where you can literally go in, and we are planning to definitely take part in that, where people can get to us through an app that we won't have to update. It won't cost us a dime, and at the same time, it wouldn't be a thing where those people that we used to call it when I was in New York, culture vultures. I think like all of you are like me, you're culture vultures. If you don't have to go to every institution and have 20 apps of different institutions on your phone, you can have one app. It's called Bloomberg Connects, I believe. Bloomberg Connects, thank you. So the digital is definitely something that's important, but we definitely think that there is a place for seeing that work of art in person. That's critical to us as well.
And if I could just add, I do think that, it's easy to forget that we do so much here that people don't see. We train artists, we make exhibitions, we do a lot of historical research, so much of trying to make the behind the scenes work visible to publics, just so that we can lower a kind of barriers of understanding of what this work looks like is really important. And so we were really proud that, one of the things that we did as we processed the John Rhoden papers into a searchable, usable archive was to build an online platform where 5,000 of the objects are digitized online. And one of the things that allows us to do as an institution is kind of reveal not just the behind the scenes research process, but all of these delicate materials that would be difficult for scholars to travel to PAFA from far off locations if they're interested in this work, but they don't necessarily have the funds or not in a position to travel during COVID. That was really hard. It was really rewarding to be able to correspond with all of these archivists all over the country, all of these junior researchers, curatorial fellows, students who said they were interested in something, that we were able to share this online platform and say, all of this archival information is in digital form. You don't necessarily have to come to PAFA and make an appointment and put on a mask and gloves and while we hover and ask you, please not to touch these delicate archival papers. It was really nice, I think, for us to be able to do that also. And I do think that digitized archives are hugely, hugely important to us. So I would be remiss not to mention that also.
Yeah, and of course that to connect that to the 19th century too, one of the initiatives that we undertook that I'm most proud of is we digitized our entire annual exhibition record from the time we started photographing it. And I remember MoMA got all this press when they digitized their annual exhibition records, but I'm like, wait, we have this, we digitized it, it's available on our website going back into the 19th century. So that's every photograph that was taken from the 19th century, from like the 1870s and 80s to the 1960s, that is searchable and available on our archival website. So we have done a lot of great innovations in digitizing access to research in our collections. And really our job is just to get the word out about it.
And before you go, I'm going to do a shameless plug. My good friend here, Barbara, said, Eric, I love your Starry Night socks, my Van Gogh socks. I just want to let you know they come from our gift shop upstairs, and that's important to us. So please, after you visit Making American Artists, I think we have one of the best gift shops. So go in if you love fun socks like me, which I do. I buy almost all of them. Please go up and support us there. So and thanks again. Give yourselves a hand.
Thank you again, Brittany, Anna, and Eric, for this incredibly insightful discussion and of course a wonderful preview on what's ahead at PAFA. And most of all, a thanks to you, our members, for being here with us and for making everything that we do here possible. So we hope to see you later again this month for the brand new exhibition opening of Rising Sun. We have member preview hour from March 23rd and 24th from 9 to 10 a.m. So you'll be able to see it before it opens to the public. So we hope to see you again there. Thank you again and have a great rest of your weekend.